Hello and welcome to Veterans of the Valley. I'm Tom Turpeyville. David West of Navasota is a proud Navy SEAL. He served in Vietnam from February of 1969 until April of 1973. He was seriously wounded 2 November 1971, received the Purple Heart. For earlier acts of bravery under fire, he received the Bronze Star. But well before Vietnam and before he became a SEAL, his assignment was 2 years aboard the USS Brazos, chasing hurricanes. And he says that was about as dangerous a duty as chasing Viet Cong. David West's story of service and his own personal challenges along the way and the battle that he fights today are all inspiring. And we thank Navy SEAL David West for his service and being our guest on Veterans of the Valley. David, it's an honor to know you and it's an honor to have you on Veterans of the Valley. Born in Wichita, Kansas, you moved to Happy, Texas. Don't remember a whole lot about Happy, and you haven't been there much since. But your dad was transferred to Ohio, and I guess that's really where you regard yourself as growing up, right?
Yes, sir.
In Ohio. Let's talk about what we referred to before you ever became a SEAL. You were aboard the USS Brazos, and you were a hurricane chaser, and that was pretty interesting duty. Talk about that.
Very interesting and very dangerous. While I was aboard the Brazos, we chased 3 different hurricanes, and they were all about the same depending on the wind velocity. Mm-hmm. The second hurricane was the worst. Those ships, which were experimental, were designed to take 72-degree rolls before they would flip over.
Right.
And we were doing 64 to 69-degree rolls.
You were getting way too close to 72.
Very close. Too close for comfort.
Indeed. So it was pretty hectic going into the eye, but then describe once you got into the eye of the hurricane.
Well, once we got into the eye, it was a completely different world in there. That water was just smooth as glass. Mm-hmm. And there were water fountains and rainbows and birds flying around. It was really something I'll never forget.
There was no wind.
No wind.
Like you said, birds. It was beautiful, and but then you had to go back out. You never got seasick though, right? You
No,
said.
never did get seasick.
Yeah.
Everybody around me did, but I didn't.
And one time you talked about it being kind of a hairy experience. You had to jump out of your bunk and you jumped into about a foot of water.
Yes, sir. We had we'd been up for, oh golly, about 15, 16 hours straight. And we took turns going to bed.
Right.
Excuse me. And we crawled in our bunks, which were in tiers. Mm-hmm. And I was in the middle tier. We had to strap ourselves in to keep from getting thrown out. And when it was my time to wake up, I jumped out of my bunk and landed in about 12 inches of water.
Right.
Which made me wonder, are we underwater or what?
You 2 years on the Brazos, and then you went into training in UDT's underwater demolition team.
Yes, sir.
That didn't last long, but talk about that duty and what that was about.
Well, basically we went through their training, which was mostly in the water, and training on different types of demolition and explosives. And we practiced a lot running up onto the beaches and planting explosives. Mm-hmm. It was something that I was about halfway interested in. I wasn't totally or completely happy with it.
Right.
And I did that from 1958 till 62.
Right.
And
62 is when President Kennedy formed the Naval Special Forces,
Yes.
which we know as the Navy SEALs.
Yes.
Why did you want to join the Navy SEALs?
I was just looking for adventure.
Yes, sir.
And I also wanted to see how far I could go.
Mm-hmm.
The Navy SEAL training is very, very hard.
Talk about Hell Week started it off. You said it started at midnight on a Sunday and it ended on midnight on the next Sunday. That was called Hell Week.
Yes.
Talk about that.
Well, during that week, if you got 2 to 3 hours of sleep, you were lucky. They pushed you to your extreme limits. Everything they did was, I mean, they forced you to do things. Like we had to swim in a mud bath, which was very difficult because we had to do it on our backs. And from point A to point B, we'd have to run up and down the beach carrying those rafts, those heavy rafts, and just things that a large percentage of us that just couldn't do it. They couldn't make it through.
Matter of fact, you said the original number was cut down quite a bit by the time the training was over.
Yes, sir. My class started out with 33 men and ended up with 11.
I think you said the next class was,
The
the
next
retention
class-
rate was even worse.
Started out at 100 men and 21 made it through.
But you did.
Yes, sir.
But
Don't ask me how.
and you admit that there were 4 or 5 times that you wanted to quit, and you talked about the method that they were told if they did want to quit, what they were to do.
All we had to do was take our hat off and lay it between our feet. No questions asked. And you were sent right back to the unit you came from.
Right.
Now, and I'm not sure just when they started that, you got a little podium with a bell on it, and you go up and ring the bell, and it means the same thing. I
Means
quit.
the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is what I was cut out for. Didn't sign up for this. But you stayed and you became a Navy SEAL. Now the training continued for about 6 months after what was considered Hell Week.
Yes.
But during that time, the Cuban Missile Crisis broke out.
Yes.
And your duty somewhat changed. Talk about your duty around Guantanamo Bay and what your duty was there as far as sort of a security.
Well, when the Cuban crisis originally broke out, they were concerned about the missiles coming from Russia to Cuba. And they had ships out there stopping the Russian freighters and boarding them and checking out their cargo. In the meantime, they evacuated the Americans from Guantanamo Bay, the military families and the civilian workers, and we were sent down there to cover the evacuation. And excuse me, in swift boats and river patrol boats, we patrolled the coastline, and the Cubans sent out gunboats, those small gunboats, and we chased them back to Havana Harbor.
That was kind of fun, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, we had a lot of fun doing that. But no shots were fired or anything. You know.
They knew what they were doing and they knew you were chasing them.
Oh yeah.
So there weren't any secrets here, and they
Yes,
went back to where you wanted them to be.
Yes, sir.
No harm done, no shots were fired. All of these movements you told me these were highly classified. You couldn't tell anyone. As a matter of fact, your wife at the time didn't even know where you were or what you were doing, right?
No.
Yeah.
No, we couldn't. It was completely top secret, our movements, our actions, so on.
Right.
We couldn't talk about it to anybody except ourselves.
Right. Vietnam, as you rightly told me, actually the issue of Vietnam had started really as far back as 1958 as a police action, but it was starting to become known as what we knew as the Vietnam War. But before you trained for Vietnam, you were on Malta working with the British Navy briefly. Talk about that duty.
Well, we were sent to Malta to work with a British Special Forces unit, and I wasn't there very long. I got word that my father was critically ill, and they sent me back to the States. the trip back was something else. They took me on a helicopter out to sea to a ship and dropped me off on the ship by High Line, which was scary.
Yes, sir.
And then I was transferred to an aircraft carrier and put on a plane that they flew me to Norfolk, Virginia, where I had connections to fly to Ohio, where my family lived. But I found out that he was in Rochester, New York on a business trip.
When he became ill.
When he became ill. And I couldn't get a flight out to New York until the next day. And when the plane landed, my brother and my sister met me at the airfield and told me that my father had passed away about 2 hours before I got there. And the Red Cross failed to let me know where my father was at.
That's very unfortunate, obviously. Something that stays with you, obviously. Sent to Vietnam in country, February of 1969, landed in Saigon, and what did they tell you when they landed? When you landed, you were in some ways a popular organization, the Navy SEALs, in kind of the bad sort of way. Talk about that.
Well, when we got there, we stepped off the plane. We were met by a Marine gunny sergeant who held us up and said, "Once your feet hit the ground in Saigon, you automatically have a $1,500 bounty on your head." The Viet Cong are the ones that put the bounty on our head. They were deathly afraid of us. And if they could get one of us, they'd get that money. They could.
But you were a highly, I keep using the word respected, as in, like you said, they were afraid of you. They called you green faces. They called you ghosts who walk at night. There were times, you've described to me that there were times that you could sort of be in an ambush of a Viet Cong platoon or squad, and you wouldn't have to fire a shot or very few shots, that they'd run away. They were that frightened of the Navy SEALs.
Yes, sir. The reason for that is we had our faces, painted with all the green and the black, and we kind of blended in with the jungle.
Right.
And when we'd spot the enemy patrol, we'd just drop down to the ground, just on our haunches.
Right.
And we'd wait until they get about from here to halfway across the room there, and we'd stand up very slowly and open our eyes, and that's all they could see is our eyes. And it scared them so bad they dropped their weapons and ran.
That scares me, you describing it, as a matter of fact. Sent to the Mekong Delta at Cam Bay, is that right? Cam Bay. And you were sent on a patrol based on information that was given you by the CIA, but it turned out that information was not timely.
No, sir. The information we got from CIA was anywhere from 2 weeks to 2 months old.
Right.
And we'd go out on patrol and subject ourselves to running into enemy patrols for nothing. So our commanding officer said, "To heck with the CIA, we'll operate on our own info."
He didn't say to heck with the CIA.
No.
So you did that, and you were sent to Cam Bay to assist training South Vietnamese Navy SEALs. Talk about that. These South Vietnamese. These were pretty brave soldiers.
Yes, some of them were.
Yes.
The ones that were the Navy SEALs were very devout in their beliefs. And
right.
Matter of fact, they used to have tattoos on their chest said "Shot Kong," which means kill Kong. And we worked with them and trained them in certain phases, and mostly in weapons and so on. And while I was there, the South Vietnamese Navy lieutenant said he wanted to play a joke on the Viet Cong. So he picked 5 of us to go with him to a village called Su Chin, which means number 9. And it was a Viet Cong rest and recreation village. And we walked in there, we were fully armed, and we walked in there and we went to this bar. And there were about 5 males there and a few females. When we walked in, they all left. So we went to another bar and walked in. There was about 7 or 8 of them, I guess. I can't remember now, but they all left. And when we went back to base camp, the Vietnamese lieutenant thought that was very funny. We didn't.
I can imagine.
And we got chewed out by our CEO.
And the lieutenant got chewed out.
Yes.
For it also. I've got a few pictures here. I think 3 pictures here. Just want to show right now. First one is a very young David West. You say you're about 17 there.
Yes, sir.
You look about 17 years old there. Next photograph. Move forward. Describe this. You're on the far left in this photograph. This
Yes,
actually
sir.
is a photograph from a book that you own called Seals at War. Talk about what we're seeing there.
We were getting ready to go out on a patrol on a raft into the canal, and we're going to cross the canal and go on into the jungle looking for a downed pilot. And in this picture, we were preparing ourselves by locking and loading, as the paraphrase goes, getting our weapons ready and our equipment.
Yes, sir. And then a final picture of you. Where was this one taken?
That was taken at Kamau Bay at our home base.
I wouldn't mess with that guy. Your duty, your unit's duty was mainly looking for downed pilots.
Yes, sir.
That was what your aim was.
Downed pilots in so-called POW camps.
Right. You found one POW camp, but they were South Vietnamese
Yeah.
prisoners. Found no Americans there.
No Americans there.
Indeed. Talk about the action that resulted in your being awarded the Bronze Star. It involved encountering a Viet Cong patrol, a point man named Darrell Moon, and the motto of "No one left behind." Given all that, talk about what happened.
Well, that motto was from the beginning of our training, that nobody gets left behind.
Yes, sir.
And on this particular patrol, there were 7 of us, and we got ambushed by about 20 Viet Cong and North Vietnamese soldiers. And Darrell was our point man, and they shot him, but he took 3 of them out before he died. And we were able to get Darrell, and we were heading back to the canal, and there was a river patrol boat there waiting on us. And while the other guys we had to wade from the bank out to the boat. And while they were putting Darrell aboard the boat, I stayed by the bank and laid down a covering fire until they got him aboard, where we could leave. And somebody wrote it up, and I got the Bronze Star for that.
Well deserved, no doubt. 2 November 1971, you earned a Purple Heart.
Yes.
Talk about that.
Well, we were on another patrol, and we got ambushed, and I was hit in the stomach with an AK-47, and it felt like somebody hit me in the stomach with a very hard baseball bat. and I was still walking around, and they tackled me to get me down so I wouldn't get hit again. And they called in the SEAL helicopters, the Wolverine, and the medevac chopper landed and picked me up and took me to Saigon. Well, they took me to a MASH unit first, and then from the MASH unit I went to the hospital in Saigon and spent about 30 days there.
Mm-hmm.
And then they transferred me to the hospital in Tokyo, Japan. I spent about 30 days there. Then they sent me home for a 30-day recuperation leave, and I didn't have to go back to Vietnam. But when I got home, I learned about my wife's boyfriend, and I only spent 9 days at home and went back to be with my buddies.
For good reason. They said, I'm going to let you go ahead and continue that story. We're going to fast forward a little bit, then we'll come back. But it's a story you don't mind telling. First off, let's say that you've been married to Cecilia for 25 years.
Yes.
You and Cecilia have a daughter who was 11 years old when you entered the scene, and she has given you 2 grandchildren.
Yes.
Who live close by in Cyprus, and you get to see a lot. So
Yes.
life is, for you and Cecilia, it's been a wonderful marriage.
Yes, it has.
I know. But the first marriage, you just said you found out about the wife's boyfriend, and then later when you went home again, you surprised him. Tell them that story.
Well, when we were pulled out of Vietnam in April of '73, we came back to the States to Treasure Island in San Francisco. And from there we were transferred, most of our guys were transferred back to Coronado to the SEAL camp. They messed my orders up and sent me to Boston, Massachusetts as tug master. And I didn't tell anybody I was coming. My wife and my kids were in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And I got home, I walked in the house, and I walked back to the kitchen, and my wife was sitting there, her younger brother was sitting there, and her boyfriend was sitting there wearing my clothes. And I call it a stupid move. He stood up and extended his hand to shake hands with me and introduce himself. And I just grabbed his hand and grabbed a handful of hair, jerked him across the table, and commenced beating him all the way out the front door. And the neighbors called the police. He went to the hospital and I went to jail. So I spent my first night home in jail. But I went before the judge at 9 o'clock the next morning, and he was very pro-military, and he asked me what happened, and I told him, and he smiled and says, "Get out of here."
In the 4 years I've been doing this show, that might be one of my favorite stories. I've got to tell you now, especially since things have turned out so well with you and Cecilia. And you have 4 children by your first wife, and,
Yes.
and they live a long way away, and you haven't seen them in a long time, but you do keep in contact
Yes,
with some of
I
them.
do.
And that's a good thing. You couldn't continue as a SEAL because of your wounds, transferred, like you said, to the Boston shipyard as a tugboat, as a tug master. And we're running short on time, and I want to get to other things. You were transferred to Pearl Harbor, and later became Chief of Security of Marine Navy Hospital there.
Yes.
Talk about that duty.
Well, that was very interesting. They didn't have what they call master at arms that was a regular master at arms. Matter of fact, it was a first-class petty officer wave, and no records, and what little records they had was all messed up. And when I was assigned there as Chief of Security, I had to go in that office and straighten everything out, get all the paperwork laid out, all the forms laid out, and train my crew. And it was an interesting job. We had, matter of fact, the only person I had to answer to was the admiral of the hospital. And some of these officers that would come in there, I mean, I was just, I was a senior chief petty officer, but some of these officers that would come in there, they'd start giving me orders.
Yes, sir.
And I would tell them, well, I'll have to check with the admiral on that. They didn't like that. But I had a lot of fun there.
You retired in June of 1979, retired from the Navy
Yes,
at that
sir.
time. You came back to Amarillo,
Yes, sir.
Amarillo Police Department. You worked for, that's where you met Cecilia.
Yes.
Was when you were in Amarillo. Became a private investigator. Came down to Navasota to work for the Texas Department of Corrections, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And retired there in 2000. And most recently, your work has been with the Grimes County and the Brazos County Sheriff's Office.
Yes, sir.
I know that's been interesting duty. I want to finish up. You had to retire from that and completely retire. In June of 2008, you were diagnosed with lung cancer.
Yes, sir.
And that went into remission, but now they say that it's come back and you're under treatment right now.
Yes,
Talk about that battle that you're fighting and your sort of your look at that and how it's going.
Well, they found the lung cancer in the lymph nodes outside the lung, but they classified it as lung cancer. And they started me on chemotherapy and radiation, which lasted about 7 weeks. I'd go for chemotherapy once a week, radiation 5 days a week. And after I got off of that, they did a CAT scan and came back and says, hey, we can't find it. And said it was in remission, and that made me feel a lot better. Then a year later, they did another CAT scan and they said it's back. And it had gone down into my adrenal area. And so they put me on chemotherapy again, which is stronger than the other, only once every 3 weeks. And that just drove me down completely. It made me so weak that I couldn't do anything.
Yes, sir.
And I told my chemo doctor, no more.
And now you're on pills, and that's working better for you.
Yes, sir.
We're out of time, David,
Yeah.
and wish you the very best, and thank you very much for your service.
Well, thank you,
And
sir.
you have no idea the honor it is to know you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your service. This is one of those stories of courage and bravery that fills chapter after chapter of the history of the Vietnam War. David West is now in a retirement he well deserves. We wish him and Cecilia and their family the very best, and we salute him for his service. I'm Tom Turbeville. Join us next time on Veterans of the Valley.